Welcome everybody to the U.S. Geological Survey's Friday's Findings webinar series. I'm Susanna Swallow. I want to thank you all for joining us today. Please go ahead and mute your phones or your computers and hold your questions to the end, and then you can use the raise hand feature or the chat feature, and we will get those answered when our speaker is done. With that, I would like to welcome Molly McCormick with the USGS Southwest Biological Science Center. She's going to be talking to us today about the National Seed Strategy Progress Report. Go ahead, Molly.
Thanks, Susanna. Hi, everyone. I'm Molly McCormick, and as Susanna just said, I'm going to be talking about the National Seed Strategy Progress Report. I'm going to put some useful links here in the chat before I start my talk. So first, I want to introduce myself in case some of you don't know me. I'm an ecologist and have been with the USGS since 2017. I coordinate the Restoration Assessment and Monitoring Program for the Southwest. That's located at the Southwest Biological Science Center in Flagstaff, Arizona. And you can find more about my program called RAMP at our website, and much of this work is focused on seed-based restoration. I also represent the USGS Ecosystems Mission Area as the USGS Federal Liaison for the Plant Conservation Alliance, and also known as the PCA. And this is a collaboration of public and private partners who share the same goal: to protect native plants by ensuring that native plant communities and their habitats are maintained, enhanced, and restored. The PCA Federal Committee is currently chaired by the Fish and Wildlife Service, and the current MOU has 10 federal agencies and bureaus as signatories. As the USGS liaison, I promote USGS science related to plant conservation and restoration and help create linkages between our science and the people who need it. And the Plant Conservation Alliance authored the National Seed Strategy for Rehabilitation and Restoration. And this was done in 2015 to foster a science-based collaborative approach to improving the use and availability of native plants needed for restoration. But why did we need a strategic plan for seeds? Well, when planning a restoration project, the importance of selecting the right native plants for the site can be overlooked. Restoration practitioners and land managers often simply choose what's available rather than what's maybe the best choice of seed. And since native plants are often limited in supply or species selection is lacking, this can result in the use of non-native species and a plant palette that is not biodiverse, and native species that are not adapted to the restoration site. So for the US government agencies who purchase over $10 million and over 2 million pounds of seeds annually to rehabilitate and restore public lands, a strategy to improve access to plant materials is key for long-term restoration success and reduce project costs in the long run. I want to note that I'm going to use the term seed to also mean other plant materials such as cuttings, container stock, spores, and other propagation materials. Most of the work that we do is for seed, but I don't want to exclude those other types of materials that are important for restoration. So the National Seed Strategy has this vision of putting the right seed in the right place at the right time, and a mission to ensure the availability of genetically appropriate seed to restore viable and productive plant communities and sustainable ecosystems. So just briefly, some 4 points about why the seed strategy was needed. And one, seeds are a critical natural resource that need to be recognized, valued, protected, and managed. As such, our nation's seed resources need the same kind of forward-thinking management that we demand for other natural resources, such as timber. 3, given their importance as the foundation of resilient ecosystems, genetically appropriate native seed need to be developed and available before the natural disasters occur and not as an afterthought of disaster recovery. And 4, ensuring the availability of genetically appropriate native seed takes forethought, planning, and time. So the National Seed Strategy has 4 goals. The first one is around identifying seed needs and ensuring the reliable availability of genetically appropriate seed. The second one is really about research to support the whole seed development process. The third one is about developing tools and training for getting the right seed in the right place. and 4 is around communication. I want to take a minute right now to define what I mean when I say locally adapted and genetically appropriate native seed. So to successfully restore highly functioning ecosystems, we must consider the type of seed used in restoration projects. So seeds are adapted to their local environment, which means that seed source and genetic diversity affect restoration outcomes and ecosystem function. Scientific research has shown that native plants adapt to local environmental conditions, and this increases their chance of surviving and reproducing. So for example, experimental comparisons of locally sourced plants versus non-locally sourced plants of the same native species in the Great Basin showed locally sourced plants survived best in 67% of comparisons and produced more plants in 90% of comparisons. And this was a study by Baughman et al. In 2019. So that shows that locally sourced plants generally perform better than native plants sourced from a different or non-local environment and can be more locally adapted to the restoration site. So I worked with the authors of that paper to create this figure. And so just to summarize, prioritizing the use of locally adapted native seeds is wise. And the risks of not doing that include inappropriate timing of growth and reproduction, germination of the plants but no survival, reduced vigor and/or survival, and reduced fruit or seed production. And all of that culminates in a lack of restoration success. And this happens because restoration sites can be different than the locations where seeds were sourced. And so some of the climatic variables that have shown to matter include mean annual precipitation, mean annual temperature, and timing of precipitation. So this study, again, was done in the Great Basin, so the results may differ slightly depending on where in the world these comparisons are being made. But they are compelling. And this is one study of many that show these kinds of results. So in this, given that genetically appropriate seeds are important, the National Seed Strategy is working to create more for the whole country. So in the summer of 2020, I was tasked with leading the writing of the Progress Report, which details what has been accomplished in 5 years of the National Seed Strategy. And the progress being made across the U.S. and its territories demonstrates effective interagency coordination. It highlights joint problem solving for natural resource challenges, showcases effective land management tools to sustain native ecosystems, assists in endangered species recovery and improving wildlife habitat, and promotes recovery from natural hazards and disturbances, and sustains multiple types of land use. So a little bit about how we did this report. So our team created a reporting mechanism that captured projects accomplished by federal agencies and their partners that met the goals of the seed strategy. And so portions of that reporting mechanism are posted on this slide. And this effort yielded 460 projects submitted and tons of photos that represent only a sample of the work being done across the US and its territories by organizations and individuals at the national, state, and local levels. So this is what we found. The big question, does the US have the right seed and other plant materials needed for disaster mitigation and other ecological restoration projects on public and private lands? In short, the answer is no. It has been estimated that 74% of native plant species needed for restoration in the US are unavailable commercially. Within the commercial native seed industry, even fewer genetically appropriate plant species are available. And this is particularly true for plant species that are difficult to farm, like wetland plants and biocrusts. So when large unexpected disturbances impact public lands, federal land management agencies often need a bigger selection of genetically appropriate native plants than is available. And lack of species and genetic diversity of commercially available seed sources increases the risk that in the short term, ecosystems become less resilient to the effects of climate change, and in the long term, ecosystems do not recover at all. So we also asked each of the projects to attribute keywords to describe the benefits of their projects and how their projects meet federal priorities. Some of them are listed here on the slide. They include wildlife habitat and corridors, wildfire rehabilitation, invasive species, rare and endangered plants and animals, and mining reclamation. And you can see that most of these priorities require seeds in every state of the nation, which I was kind of surprised to see. So where are we making progress? The largest number of projects were reported under goals 2 and 3, and this is indicative of the amount of research and effort necessary to take seed from wildland collection to commercial production. So many projects met more than one goal, which is why the total number equals more than 460.
Okay.
So how is seed being developed? There's unprecedented collaboration. Each agency has its own mission and niche within the National Seed Strategy, while also contributing overall to the 4 goals of this strategy. So this chart shows the interagency partnership that was reported from those 460 projects. If a project reported meeting an objective, we listed the partner agency on this table. This is not a complete list of all the work being done by various agencies, but it does show how the agencies are working together to increase the supply of native seed for restoration. And the logos at the bottom of this slide are for all of the federal partners that were reported in each of the projects. There's likely more that were not captured in the data call. And the projects listed diverse partners, and this includes research and educational institutions, nonprofit organizations, state and municipal agencies, farms and nurseries, tribal organizations and governments, gardens and arboreta, water conservation districts, and the oil and gas industry. So to meet the goals of the National Seed Strategy, groups are working across land ownership jurisdictions. So these projects can include small projects in national parks or BLM field offices, and all the way to projects that span entire ecoregions and even multiple states. So this chart demonstrates the size of the seed needs and the scale at which we need to work. So how are projects funded? 300 of the 460 projects reported costs that totaled $167 million. And these efforts are funded in a variety of ways. Most projects are funded by existing federal agency programmatic funding, or the base funding that federal programs receive to accomplish their mission. And new funding for projects comes from a variety of other sources: grants, partnerships, private funding, and combinations of these. In the report, there's an appendix that lists all of the funding contributors. So in 2015, when the PCA created the National Seed Strategy, there was also a business plan made. And the business plan estimates some $358 million needed over a period of 5 years to meet some of these goals. And so in 2015 to 2020, only $20 million was designated to the Bureau of Land Management only to implement the seed strategy. So additional funds were leveraged via various federal and non-federal federal programs that I showed in the previous slide. But this is to say that a lot of work has been done with that money that was given to the BLM and all of those, the $167 million contributed by projects. But the 2015 business plan still serves as a useful cost estimate for continued implementation of the seed strategy. So this is the seed development process, which was first developed in a BLM report. It describes the steps needed to take a seed from the wild and produce it and put it back into a restoration site. And as an offshoot of the Progress Report, some of the report co-authors and a few of my colleagues at the Southwest Biological Science Center wrote a manuscript that describes the seed development process depicted here. And we use the information gathered in the Progress Report to flesh out these steps. And the article contains a list of key issues, complexities, and challenges for each of the steps that groups may want to consider when developing seed for restoration. In addition, we hope this article paints a clear picture for people new to seed development about why the process takes forethought, collaborative planning, and resources. And I put a link to that article in the chat at the beginning of this talk. So the report contains a summary of work being done for each of the steps of that seed development process, and I'm going to go through each one of these later. But right now I just want to focus on that center circle that describes the partners. So in summary, there were 17 federal agencies, 52 states and territories, over 20 tribal nations, 380 total partners for $167 million invested. So let's start with collection, which is this first step in the seed development process. And collection is harvesting seeds from wild populations. The Seeds of Success program is a program that's mostly responsible for most of these collections. It is a national native seed project led by the BLM in partnership with the U.S. Forest Service, Bend Seed Extractory, the Agricultural Resource Service, and the Fish and Wildlife Service, with many non-federal partners. And as the first step of the native seed development process, the Seeds of Success mission is to collect wildland native seed for research, development, germplasm conservation, and ecosystem restoration. All Seeds of Success collections are tested for quality, including purity, germination, and weed content. So this map shows the 8,862 Seeds of Success collections between 2015 and 2020. But since the project's inception in 2001, Seeds of Success teams have made over 26,000 collections from 5,800 taxa. The second step is evaluation and development, and this is research into basic life history traits that influence the successful use of native seed and restoration. The scientific research forms the foundation of every step of the native seed development process, and specifically goals 2 and 3 of the National Seed Strategy. The National Seed Strategy requires long-term research programs and adaptive management dedicated to building our knowledge and best practices for developing and using genetically appropriate seed. So there is currently a research study being conducted by the National Academies of Science and Medicine called an assessment of native seed needs and capacities. Essentially, this is meeting a large part of the first goal of the seed strategy. And they've come out with a preliminary report. Their final report is going to be due at the early part of the next calendar year. But if you want to know more about that, the website is listed on this slide. In the progress report, we had over 170 scientific reports and articles on native seed research and development, and they're all included in an appendix of the report. And so just because we're at the USGS and we do research, I also wanted to highlight some sample research questions that are really important to the seed strategy right now. And that includes, how do we know which plant species or population of that species is best suited for current and future habitats for any given restoration situation? How do we ensure that seed growing practices retain the genetic diversity important for survival? And how can we improve restoration outcomes so that seeds grow, reproduce, and thrive at restoration sites? So all kinds of work needed right now. And the next step is field establishment, which is the development of native seed production protocols and seed stock by the agricultural science community. So each species requires research on best growing practices. And the report offers a few examples of projects currently being led by the USDA. And we found that thousands of native seed crops are being developed by local and regional efforts in over 32 ecoregions of the country. And the next step is seed production. And this is the farming of seed for restoration. So taking that seed from the field establishment step and bulking it up. In this step, it's important to maintain genetic diversity while native plants are being grown in an agricultural setting. Best practices for species are still being developed. The growing native seed is not for every farmer, but more farmers are needed to try out this new kind of crop, this native seeds as crop. So because producing native seeds for a functioning ecosystem requires a diverse botanical skill set, from experience with specialized agricultural and seed harvesting techniques to knowledge of native plant community characteristics. And this process works best when producers and end users can work together. And so in the progress report, we found that there's over 65 nurseries, farms, growers, and botanical gardens engaged, which is a great number, but considering that we need this everywhere in the country, it shows that a lot more is needed. But we did capture that this is happening in over 21 regional seed partnerships, which is pretty exciting. The next step is procurement, which also includes seed certification. And this is all about cleaning, testing, labeling, and purchasing genetically appropriate seed. This step requires collaboration needed across many seed users and producers at an eco-regional scale. And the report offers a couple examples of mechanisms that support public-private partnerships via things like the indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity, or IDIQ contracts, and using the Good Neighbor Authority. So planning is critical here and can improve availability. We think that prediction lists are best made 5 to 10 years out, whereas a lot of times right now, seeds are requested sort of like weeks out. So a big change is needed there. Seed certification is still developing for native plants and is not always available, sufficient, or required. And the report offers a couple examples of where the seed certification process is being done. And in the report, we found that we're spending over $20 million annually on seeds to purchase over 2 million pounds of native seed. But this varies widely year by year. And the next step is seed storage, which is the seed banking. It includes short-term storage for active use and long-term storage for conservation. We found that there's 2 facilities which are increasing the seed storage capacity to 2.1 million pounds and over 250 types of seed available for large-scale restoration, which is great progress, but we probably need more than 2 facilities. And then the last step, which is restoration, and that's rebuilding native plant communities for functioning resilient ecosystems. But this also includes restoration, research on restoration practices. And we found that over 10 million acres are being impacted. This includes 17 million sagebrush seedlings grown. So the report covers 20 case studies, and I encourage you to read it to find out more. And some of the other topics we cover are seeds for post-fire rehabilitation, tribal engagement, and seed sovereignty. There's many examples of collaborative partnerships and how the seed strategy promotes food security through conservation of crop wild relatives, which are all native plants, and the use of seeds for mine reclamation, recovering habitat of threatened endangered species, and how restoration is done in many places, including schoolyards and urban areas. We also asked each of the PCA federal liaisons to write a summary that explains how their agency or bureau mission relates to the native plants and how they contribute to and benefit from the National Seed Strategy. So if you're curious about how any of these groups interface with the seed strategy, you can find their summary in the report. Here's a little snapshot of the USGS summary, which shows how many projects we have contributed that meet the different objectives of the seed strategy. And the USGS contributed nearly half of the publications that are listed in the appendix of the report. And so Executive Order 14008 to the Tackling the Climate Crisis at Home and Abroad identified many priorities related to conservation and ecosystem restoration. Because plants form the foundation of healthy, resilient ecosystems, the National Native Seed Strategy helps to meet conservation and climate change related objectives in many ways, from creating jobs in the restoration economy to developing tools for climate smart restoration. And this table is in the report. I'm not going to go through it now. I just wanted to show you that it exists in case you needed to tie your activities to this executive order. So in conclusion, the seed strategy is needed now more than ever. The progress made implementing the National Seed Strategy is helping to meet an increasing demand for seed to restore plant communities altered by natural or human-caused events on both public and private lands. In the past 5 years of implementing the seed strategy, the scientific knowledge gained has worked to reduce erosion, reduce the spread of non-native invasive plants, and promote productivity and biodiversity of plant and animal communities. Through increased coordination and communication between and among the public and private sectors, the pace and scale of restoration will be accelerated. And so success for the strategy looks like nationwide networks of people working together, botanists to collect native seed, researchers to identify and develop the appropriate native seed, farmers to grow native seed, nurseries and seed storage facilities to supply the seed, and restoration ecologists and land managers who know how to put the right seed in the right place at the right time. So just some next steps here. We want to expand economic opportunities for farmers to grow genetically appropriate seed, actively engage with Native American tribes and Alaska Native villages to honor their indigenous knowledges and ensure culturally important plants are conserved, increase botanical expertise in federal agencies to inform all restoration, rehabilitation, and reclamation projects, develop regional seed networks with partners who develop, store, deliver locally adapted seeds, support evidence-based decision-making through research monitoring and consistent scientist practitioner engagement, and then finally increase public education and awareness on the importance of genetically appropriate native seed and ensuring the availability of this seed throughout America is important, achievable, and it's a commitment to the health and prosperity of future generations. So thanks for listening. If you're a USGS researcher whose work contributes to the National Seed Strategy and you're not already included on an email list, I'll send out requests and information periodically. Please get a hold of me. I would love to include you. You can read the report. I put that link in the chat at the beginning of the talk, and there's also some social media you can engage with if you want. So thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Molly. I really appreciate the talk. It's great to have you on our series today. If you have a question for Molly, please raise your hand or go ahead and type it in the chat feature. I do apologize for the not being able to admit one of our guests. I don't know what's going on there. It won't let me admit her, so hopefully maybe she called in. So again, raise your hand for any questions or go ahead and type that in the chat. I did put Molly's email address in the chat as well if you would like a copy of the slides, or if you do think of a question for her, you'll find that there. Can the USGS NSS email list include other DOI folks?
Hi, Adrian. Thanks for that question. I think that the Federal Implementation Working Group is going to cover all of the things that other folks may want to know. And so for those of you who don't know, the Plant Conservation Alliance has this offshoot group of people just focusing, and we have monthly calls on the seed strategy. And so the USGS list is really about those of us at USGS who do the research, so that I can just kind of engage with you on information that's important just for us. And we can communicate in that way.
Thanks. Any other questions? I don't see anything popping up in the chat other than a lot of kudos. Good job. Okay, here we go. Is there anything in the current Farm Bill or proposals for the next Farm Bill for providing subsidies for farmers willing to grow native seeds?
That's a great question, Frank, and I don't feel like I'm the person to answer that. I would love to see it, though. If there's someone else on the call that has information, feel free to chime in.
All right, well, with that, I want to thank you all for coming, and I hope that you can join us. We actually are not going to skip a week. We're going to be back at it next Friday for Survival of Large Herbivores. Thank you, Molly, so much again for joining us, and we will see you all again soon.